The idea of East Coast Thrills actually came to me about 2 years ago in October of 2013. I was in the shower and I was just thinking about Hurricane Sandy that happened 1 year prior. And when I was growing up, I've always been to the Jersey Shore. I've been to Seaside, I've been to Wildwood, Point Pleasant. That all of these memories started running through my head. I was really depressed at the time, because before I came up with the idea for East Coast Thrills, I had a small film company where my partner and I didn't exactly agree on many things, so we had to part ways, and I gave him all the rights. So now it's just me, and I'm thinking to myself, like, what am I going to do for my next film? What's my next project going to be? As all these ideas and emotions were running through my head, I started thinking about all the times I went to the theme parks, specifically on the East Coast, that I brought my camera and just filmed different parts of the theme park, including the coasters. And I said, well, wait a minute. I have a degree in filmmaking, and I love amusement parks. Why not do a documentary about amusement parks? And that's when it clicked. I got out of the shower, I sat down, and I started writing what would be a little synopsis of East Coast Thrills. As I was in the process of writing East Coast Thrills, I would talk to different people and try to get their point of view of what would they do in my shoes, get some opinions, maybe some suggestions of what parks I can do. And a lot of people suggested Palisades Amusement Park. And the funny thing about Palisades Amusement Park is that I was never around for Palisades. It was opened in the late 1800s and then it closed in 1971. Palisades Amusement Park is going to be one of the parks I'm going to do. Then I thought about thinking about the other 3 parks. I was like, well, what other 3 parks could I do? I looked on my hard drive and I started looking at all the different parks I went to where I had footage from. I had a lot of footage from Hershey Park, Six Flags Great Adventure, and Dorney Park. So I said, well, you know what? This is something I can work with. So I started writing down, ideas of how I'm going to formulate the script. And I would go to my friends and family members and say, hey, you know what? I have these 4 parks I'm going to put into the film. What do you think? And I got some really positive feedback. I said, well, you know what? Those are the 4 parks I'm going to do then. And then the reason why, a lot of people also ask me, why those 4 particular theme parks? I've been there many times. I figure, you know what? As Stephen King would say, write what you know. If I'm going to make this a feature-length documentary, I don't want to bore people. So I want to give people the exact amount of time they need to sit in a movie theater without getting very antsy, just to get the crowd involved. I want people to watch the film, not to be bored, but to enjoy it. So this way, when they watch it, all these nostalgic memories would come up and then they could start going, oh, I do remember that. And that was the reason why I picked those 4 parks. We had Richard and Emily Franco that I knew from CBP. Yasmin Yarosh, who I also know from CBP. James Musto, who was my next door neighbor, he now lives in Delaware. And a guy named Darren. Now, some of you that are watching this DVD, there's an inside joke. It is not Darren Johnstone. No. Darren was actually one of my managers at Barnes & Noble. And I sat down with him one day and I just put my cell phone on a table and I said, can you tell me something about Six Flags? And the first thing that came to his mind was lightning loops. I said, oh, perfect, lightning loops, I'm going to feature that. Just run with it. And he said whatever came out of his mind, it was like 5 minutes long. I took it and I saved it. So going back to Richard and Emily Franco, I met Richard and Emily probably close to 6 or 7 years ago because I used to work with Richard in Barnes & Noble. He's quite a character. He's a very interesting person. I still can't put my finger on it. But he's understanding, he's a hard worker, and he actually has his own theater troupe called the Cherry Blossom Players. Plug. His wife, Emily, runs it with him. So I was in a play in February of 2014 called A Murder is Announced by Agatha Christie, in which I played Inspector Craddock. Ricky and I got really, really close. So I said, Ricky, would you consider sitting down in front of a camera and talking about your experiences at a particular theme park? He says, yeah, I got no problem with that. And then Emily's like, yeah, I guess I'll sit there. She's not much for the camera, but she did a great job anyway. The funny thing, about interviewing Ricky and Emily is that the day we did it, it was in May of 2014, and the day we picked the interview was the exact same day that right next door to their apartment, they were doing house renovations. So like every 5 minutes I had to yell cut because either somebody was operating a chainsaw, a handsaw, a hammer, somebody yelling, get the 2x4. Just, it was a comedy of errors. Yasmin Yarosh is actually a very talented young lady. I met her as well through Ricky and the Cherry Blossom Players. We worked together on Murders Announced. She was another character in the play. And I just realized that there's just something interesting about Yasmin. Not only is her name very interesting, because you think of Jasmine, but I was like, no, it's Yasmin. I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool. So we got to know each other a little bit well, and I said, Yasmin, there's just, you're very creative, you have a wild imagination, and you're not afraid to express yourself on stage. Would you be interested in sitting down in front of a camera and talking about your favorite theme park experience? At first she was a little apprehensive about it. She's like, well, I'm not really old enough to remember that much, but I said, well, you know what, is there something recent that you can talk about? It's like, yeah, I think I went with my brother last year, or 2 or 3 years ago, and it was like the first time I ever went there, and it was a surprise. It's, oh, good, just don't tell me anymore, end it right there. Keep that memory, and we'll schedule a day or two to do the interview. And she was a pleasure to work with. She had all these crazy stories that she shared in front of the camera, and some of them made them to East Coast Thrills, and it was really a pleasure to work with her. James Musto, the oldest guy in the film, or the classic guy in the film who spoke about Palisades Amusement Park, used to be my next door neighbor. He owned the garage, and one day my father and I were outside next to the garage, and he was working James. So we were talking about Palisades Amusement Park and how we were going to put it into the movie. And James' ears picked right up and he said, oh, you talking about Palisades Amusement Park? I said, yes, we were. He goes, oh, man, I got some memories from there. I used to go there as a kid. I'm like, I got my interview. Interesting thing about James is that he has no filter. And I thought that was great because he was close to 80 years old and he was just a very nice, funny guy. Very down to earth as well. So one day we scheduled the interview, and I sat down with him and said, listen, I have a series of about 5 questions that I'm going to ask you, but if you feel in any course of this interview that you want to add something, especially a personal experience, have at it. I'll let the camera roll. I will not yell cut or say stop. Just go. I asked him about 3 questions. In the last 2 questions, I didn't even have to get to because he actually got to them before I asked him. So after we're done the interview, he says, do you want me to talk about it anymore? I have a lot more experiences. No, you know what, Rich? I said, not Richard. So you know what, James? We have enough. And I'm going to use what we got for now. Thank you so much for your participation. I wish I would have had more people to interview, but between the time constraints and basically that's what it was. It was the time constraints. Getting the film done, getting the advertising out there. For what I had to work with, it was a really great product. As the script came into a better perspective of what I was going to do, I decided, you know what? I don't want to be a part of the film. I just want to be behind the scenes, and I'm going to have a voice to it. I want to do a narrator, sort of like a Ken Burns sort of thing. I was thinking about maybe, is it going to be a persuasive documentary? Is it going to be an informative documentary? I sat down, I read the script about 3 times, and I was like, you know what? I want to make this an informative documentary, but I'm going to let somebody tell the story from behind the camera, and it wasn't going to be me, because my voice, you don't want to hear my voice talk for an hour like this. It's not interesting. It doesn't catch your attention. It's annoying. I started searching around for people that could provide the voiceover. The one person that always ran into my mind that I thought would be perfect for this was a guy named Richard Brand. Now, Richard Brand is a customer of Barnes & Noble, and when I worked there, he used to come in all the time and buy CDs. So the one day he came in, I thought, you know what? Let me have him read a few lines and see how he would sound as the narrator for East Coast Thrills. As I was ringing Richard up, I said, Richard, just for the heck of it, would you mind just saying a few words for me? Not knowing that he was actually reading a few lines from East Coast Thrills script. He said it, and I was like, you know what? I think I found my voice. We lost contact for a few months, and I didn't have his number. I couldn't find him on Facebook. So one day, I had to go to Barnes & Noble and pick up a DVD that I had in reserve. So as I'm walking out of the building, I see him in the front by the bestsellers. I'm like, "Oh, Richard, how are you? It's Steve. Remember I was talking about you with the documentary?" He goes, "Oh, yeah, Steve, how are you?" I said, "Remember how we spoke the last time and I was considering you for a part in the film, mostly the narrator?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Well, the part is yours if you want it." He goes, "Oh, okay, sure." Your voice is the perfect pitch that I need. Make the facts in East Coast Thrills come alive. And I gave it to him 2 parks at a time, so that this way, it wasn't too overwhelming. And this way he can get adjusted to the script and the rhythm of the script and how it's going to be read. So when the audience hears it, it's fine for the ear. We did this in actually 2 days, about a month apart. One day in July and one day in August. And we sat in his apartment for about, I would say, close to 5 hours. And not many people realize that when you do film, no matter if it's behind the scenes, acting, camera, directing, when you work for a while, you get very punchy. He was sitting on one end of the table, and I was sitting on the other end of the table, and in the middle, I had the microphone with the camera running, and I was following the script as he was reading. I just noticed that when he was getting punchy, he would flub his words, and it was just so funny. Like, he'd sit there, and he would say something like, "Well, this year in Six Flags," I'm like, "Okay, let's do that again. Take 2, take 3, take 4, take 5. After we're done with the second day of narration, he said, "Steve, how are you going to put this together? I don't understand in my mind how you're going to piece this puzzle together." I said, "Don't worry, Richard. That's my job as an editor and a filmmaker. I will make it work." So when the premiere finally came, after the film, he came up to me, and he's like, I didn't know how you were going to do this, but you made it work. That's what I like about filmmaking, is putting the puzzle together. And he really did an awesome job, too. A lot of people were saying, "Hey, who's that guy's voice? He should get more work. He should do more." And I says, "You know what? Richard is quite a catch." Because believe it or not, Richard Brand's father, for the people out there that know the old NBC Peacock, they used to come up before a show or a movie or a certain prime presentation, would say, "This presentation is brought to you in part by," that was actually Richard's father doing that voiceover. And Richard also used to do a lot of plays as well, community and in New York. Richard was definitely the perfect choice as the narrator for East Coast Thrills. Last thing I want to talk about is the score for East Coast Thrills, the music behind the movie. The person who scored the film, his name is Rob Benny. Rob Benny is actually a close friend of mine who also worked at Barnes & Noble. I met so many creative people at Barnes & Noble, they shouldn't even be in retail. Rob Benny is a very talented individual who's probably involved in, I say, about 3 bands. I sat down with him one day. I says, "You know what, Rob, we've worked together in the past when I had my old film company. We did music, but you know what? We're going to do something different this time." I ran the idea of East Coast Thrills past him and told him what I was going to do. And he seemed really eager about it. He's like, "You know what, that's actually a great idea, Steve. I think you might have found your niche." So, "You know what, Rob? I think I'm on my way to something great here." I said, "Would you like to do the music for East Coast Thrills? Because you're a very talented performer. You're a guitarist. You play piano. You play the bass. You do everything. Would you like to do the soundtrack?" He goes, "Yeah, absolutely. Just let me know what you want. Give me some time, and I'll do it for you." We scheduled a meeting. We sat down to dinner. Gave him a couple ideas on paper, what I was looking for, the kind of sound, kind of mood, the emotions I wanted to get from people in the audience. And he's like, "Yeah, I think I could do that." When he was close to being done with the score, he actually made 2 scores for the film. He made the opening, closing theme, as well as the theme for the Palisades Amusement Park when people were talking about the closing. He would email me samples and clips of the music. And as I sat down and listened to him, his scores were getting better, better, and better. So when the final score came through, the final cut, I was in awe. Because when I first put the trailer of East Coast Thrills online, it was taken down for copyright infringement of using an 80s song. So I was like, you know what, that's going to be a big issue later on down the line. I better figure out a way to fix this. So I thought about royalty-free music, and the stuff they had to choose from just sucked. So what Rob gave me was so much better. I mean, he's such a talented guy, and I would absolutely have him do all my scores, much like Tim Burton and Danny Elfman, who used to be the lead singer of Oingo Boingo. They worked together for almost every film, and that's how Rob and I, we have this relationship where, we work together professionally, but we're also friends. So yeah, the music of East Coast Thrills definitely added an extra theme, an extra feeling, an extra emotion, ambience, whatever you want to call it, whatever adjective you want to use to describe it. It just gave something extra to the film that without it, it just wouldn't have the same effect. And I would just have to say that Rob Benny is definitely the best musician I've ever worked with, and I would continue working with him.